When the world first got to see the 1991 film Highlander II: The Quickening, there was a moment when it was almost universally acknowledged that this franchise had well and truly jumped the shark. The moment when, going against everything the audience had learned in the first Highlander movie, it was revealed that the immortal human characters so central to the story were in fact aliens from the planet Zeist. But this was only the start of the madness, both on screen and off, for one of the most notorious sequels of all time. Welcome to Sequelpalooza, the series that takes a hit movie, asks what happened next, and discovers that it's usually a complete and utter mess. In 1986, Highlander struck a nerve, a fantasy adventure from a music video director packed with immortals, sword fights, Queen songs, and Sean Connery being awesome. It became the stuff of VHS legend. And then came the sequel. By the early 90s, the original team reconvened in South America for round 2. But the result was a full-blown cinematic meltdown for the ages, with plot holes wider than the Scottish Highlands. How did a sci-fi rock curio written by a university student become such an iconic cult movie? How did Highlander 2 descend into such a monumental disaster that almost everyone involved attempted to disown it? And how was this presumed franchise destroyer only the beginning of the Highlander journey over the coming decades?
There can be only one!
There should have been only one. This is Sequelpalooza. Come on, Johnny, I've told you this already. If he can't be sat next to Madonna for the ceremony, he just won't be at the Grammys. It's as simple as that. Oh hey, didn't see you there. CS here, manager for only the coolest bands. The Durans, Spandau, Men Without Hats, Kajagoogoo, all the big hitters. And here in the mid-80s, if you ain't on MTV, you ain't anywhere. These music video directors have really taken things to another level, so that's why I started representing directors as well. And my newest client, let me tell you, this guy is going straight to the top of the movie business. He's made some of the most iconic videos of all time. He just made the best video ever with Duran Duran for more than £1 million. He's even made his first feature-length film. And his next one, seriously, this is the one. Biggest film of 1986 incoming, no question. And once it gets to the sequel, watch out. We are talking gangbusters numbers here. Anyway, mustache, I've got an 11 o'clock with a record label exec and a couple of Harvey Wallbangers. Ciao ciao darlings, mwah. Sorry about that guy, but he's kind of right. By the middle of the 1980s, MTV and the music video aesthetic had permeated every corner of culture, and Hollywood was no exception. In the end, some of the most important and high-profile directors of the next 30 years would graduate from this new short-form medium. But in the first half of the 80s, there were few hotter names in the music video world than Australian director Russell Mulcahy, and he had plans to conquer the big screen. Mulcahy had made many of the biggest music videos of the time, and his work was stuck on repeat on MTV, from I'm Still Standing to Total Eclipse of the Heart and numerous Duran Duran efforts. Mulcahy was one of the leading lights of what had become a rapidly growing industry. His video for Duran Duran's 1984 song The Wild Boys was a barely hidden pilot for a film version of William S. Burroughs' novel of the same name, which Mulcahy was keen to direct. And yes, CS was right. The music video, which took over a stage at Pinewood Studios and was, for all intents and purposes, a mini-movie, cost over $1 million, an enormous amount of money for a video back then. That same year, Mulcahy released an actual movie, a low-budget creature-featured giant boar horror called Razorback that he'd made in the summer of 1983 in his native Australia. Though he'd previously directed a documentary starring Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, Razorback was the first film that Hollywood took any notice of. Though it wasn't a hit by any means, it was a calling card that gave Mulcahy valuable experience and showcased his visual style. It wasn't like the early big screen efforts of other music video luminaries were blowing up the box office either. The same year Razorback arrived, Steve Barron, who had been responsible for the Billie Jean video and would later deliver all-time MTV classics like Take On Me and Money for Nothing, made his directorial debut with Electric Dreams, a comedy about a love triangle between a boy, a girl and a computer, which ended up being far more famous for its theme song than for the movie itself. But these movies had been made, and the MTV aesthetic was all over huge hits like Flashdance. It felt like just a matter of time before someone like Mulcahy would have a Hollywood smash hit. With a full-length feature under his belt, in between almost constant music video work, the director went searching for his second project. Something bigger, in scope, budget, and prestige. And he eventually found it in an action fantasy script about immortals battling across different centuries, with the final battle happening in the present day. Originally written for a UCLA assignment by student Gregory Wyden in the early 80s. When Wyden's professor read the thing, he quickly suggested that he look to sell it. This turned out to be an excellent idea. It rapidly became one of the hottest undeveloped scripts doing the rounds in Hollywood, before producers William Panzer and Peter Davis paid Wyden $200,000 for the rights to make it. Going through rewrites with contributions from Peter Bellwood and future Beverly Hills Cop 2 and Hunt for Red October screenwriter Larry Ferguson, Highlander's script landed on Mulcahy's desk after it had secured financial backing from Fawn EMI, a subsidiary of the EMI music label the director had made many a video for already, which was now investing heavily into movies. 20th Century Fox agreed to handle distribution in North America. Mulcahy made a strong pitch to be its director, and, with the producers keen for a music video style energy, he got the job. The whole thing could only be described with that most 80s of buzzwords, synergy. The film Mulcahy was so desperate to make centered around Connor MacLeod, who was accused of witchcraft and banished from his 16th century Scottish Highlands village when he somehow survives a fatal attack from Barbarian the Kurgan. But he isn't a witch, he is an immortal, one of a rare group of ageless humans who can live through centuries and only be murdered if they are beheaded. Gory. He is trained and schooled by Ramirez, played with a knowing wink and very little accent by Sean Connery, as he prepares Connor one day to fight in the Gathering, a last man standing showdown between the remaining immortals for the prize, which will finally take place centuries later in modern day, 1980s New York City, a time where Connor will once again face his murderer Kurgan, played by Clancy Brown, who quite literally chews the scenery up. But in the end, there can be only one. An ideal platform for Mulcahy's style, you can see why the director was so keen to make it. For the key role of Connor MacLeod, Mulcahy found his lead in the form of Christopher Lambert, who had made his name with the likes of Greystoke and Luc Besson's Subway, an absolutely awesome movie if you haven't seen it. Lambert didn't speak much English at the time, but he had a haunting, ageless quality perfect for the part. Adding Connery gave the film instant prestige, even if only having him contractually for 7 days of filming made life more complex. With his experience of fast turnaround music videos though, Mulcahy made it work. And that filming took place between spring and summer 1985. Mulcahy prioritized practical effects as much as possible for a sci-fi epic crossing centuries, which gave the film a gritty feel, but also saw Sean Connery almost accidentally beheaded for real at one stage. The former Bond's head survived though, and as the movie wrapped there was every reason to believe it could become a genuine hit. Queen certainly loved it. When Mulcahy approached them to allow the use of one of their songs in the film, the band was so taken with the footage they saw that they proposed contributing the best part of an album's worth. From It's a Kind of Magic to Who Wants to Live Forever, Freddie Mercury and Co.'s offering helped Mulcahy's movie come to life. Mixed with Michael Kamen's score, it was a perfect fit. Even though the US version had some minutes trimmed from it prior to release, much to Mulcahy's dismay, taking everything into account, Highlander looked like it had half a chop of becoming a success when it rolled into North American cinemas on March 7th, 1986. And then reality struck. Fox didn't think the American audience would get it and didn't get behind it at all. The poster made Highlander look like some sort of serial killer thriller, and the marketing didn't seem to reflect the unique movie they had on their hands. Landing in 7th spot on opening weekend, behind the likes of Wildcats, Hannah and Her Sisters, Down and Out in Beverly Hills, and Pretty in Pink, none of which were new releases that week, it would build no momentum and drop out of cinemas not too much later. Critics were not charmed by the film. Even the best reviews called it a mishmash, though it was also labelled stultifyingly, jaw-droppingly, achingly awful, a film that keeps on exploding for almost 2 hours with nothing at stake, and one that almost never makes any sense. Gene Siskel, perhaps unsurprisingly, dealt the final blow. There were more than a few times during this hyper-violent film in which I felt as if I were a baby being thrown to a dog of a movie. Making just $5.9 million in North America against its $19 million budget, things were not looking good. As producer Panzer remembers, Fox basically threw Highlander 1 away. They had a curious disrespect for the intelligence of the American people. The film opened and closed, and we were grotesquely depressed. We'd been royally screwed by 20th Century Fox. But then, something started happening. Highlander became a hit across Europe, adding almost $13 million to its takings, but it absolutely blew up on video, finding a huge fan base, including in the US, and becoming an important entry into the sci-fi movie world for a generation of adolescents. It lost money in cinemas, but would seemingly live forever through home media. Looking back at the reviews, I don't really understand them. It is the flashy 80s music video aesthetic that makes the film unique. It has style, but also substance. The relationship between Connor and his wife Heather, played by B.T. Edney, gives it genuine emotional warmth. Even the relationship with Ramirez feels genuine. It's a bit ridiculous for sure. The accents, from Lambert's French Scotsman to Connery's Scottish, Spanish, Egyptian, are all over the place. But it's fun. Everyone gives their all. Connery in particular seems to be having the time of his life, and it looks amazing. It's also a complete package. I'm not even a huge Queen fan. Like, I obviously acknowledge Freddie Mercury is an incredible frontman and their music is catchy, but I wouldn't ever chill out and play a Queen record as an adult, if you know what I mean. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here. In Highlander, their music fits like a glove and gives it a unique and original angle. The songs take the whole movie to another level. Anyone who can hear Who Wants to Live Forever in this film and not well up even a little bit is quite frankly made of stone. It's part of the reason why it's a shame that it was such a flop in its first run on the big screen. With the music and the visuals combined, Highlander is just so cinematic. But the fact that it was an unquestionable smash hit on video meant that it could live on. Perhaps not forever, but at least for a sequel. Even if everything seemed nicely wrapped up in part 1. With the template established, a follow-up would be a slam dunk. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Possibly go wrong. In a world where VHS was still cool, slices were half price on Tuesdays, and sequels were often mind-boggling for all the wrong reasons, one YouTube channel dared to go further. Introducing Club Slice, a bold new dimension where members get early access to main channel Culture Slice videos, exclusive series, and plenty more retro goodness on the way. So smash that join button or click the link in the description to become a member and experience the deep cut. very occasionally we get a movie so misguided, so confused and confusing, so swept off course by external factors and internal errors, so poorly received by literally everyone that its very failure becomes a work of art in itself. A masterpiece of disaster, a true all-timer for the Sequelpalooza Hall of Shame, featuring space aliens from the planet Zeist. In 1991, the world got to see Highlander II, The Quickening. Producer William Panzer had long said there would be no sequel, to the point that the ending of Part 1 actively avoided allowing for a straightforward route to a follow-up. But money talks and a diabolical sequel walks, or whatever the phrase is. And by the late 80s, Highlander's success on video and TV shifted the producer's perspective on making another one. European distributors who had seen Highlander become a box office smash hounded them for a follow-up. In Panzer's words, they were told to make it work. Mulcahy was open to returning. After Highlander, the director had continued to make music videos, though at a slower rate, as his Hollywood career didn't quite take off as he might have hoped. In fact, by the time Highlander II was confirmed, he hadn't actually made another film. He was originally set to make Rambo 3, but would eventually be replaced by second unit director Peter MacDonald due to creative differences with Sly Stallone. Although the Denzel Washington thriller Ricochet would actually end up being released before it in North America, at the time Highlander 2 went into production, this would be the first movie he'd made since Highlander 1, the best part of half a decade earlier. Lambert had managed to make other films, both in the US and his native France, but none had been hits. If Connery was in, so was he. The former Bond was considered by the distributors to be vital to the film's success, and he agreed to return, receiving $3 million for just 6 days of filming. Nice work if you can get it. The cast was filled out by the likes of Virginia Madsen as a Rebel Alliance leader, and Connor's new love interest, Michael Ironside as the evil Katana, and John C. McGinley, who will always be Dr. Cox to me, playing a nasty corporate overlord who, for some reason, decides to adopt a ridiculous put-on Orson Welles impression. It's up there with Dan Aykroyd in Caddyshack 2 as one of the most bizarre vocal choices we've seen on Sequelpalooza so far. The producers and various writers struggled to crack the concept of a sequel. Original creator Wyden was busy on Backdraft at the time, and multiple scripts were rejected by the director and star for being terrible. Perhaps they should have quit while they were ahead at this stage, but they had secured independent financing and eventually came to a concept that seemed acceptable. Highlander 1's screenwriter Bellwood returned to pull the whole thing together, with a baffling alien origin story at its centre. Highlander 2's big reveal would end up being that the immortals were, in fact, aliens from the planet Zeist. As producer Panzer reflects, we made a choice to attempt to answer a question that the audience had asked us over and over again. Where do these guys come from? Well, you know, it probably was a question we shouldn't have answered. But that choice was only the start of the problems. First, there was the decision to move production to that famous hotbed of blockbuster filmmaking, Argentina. That's right, Highlander 2's producers had been persuaded to decamp the whole exercise to South America, allowing them to make the most of cheaper labour costs, huge Buenos Aires sound stages, tax incentives, and favourable exchange rates to stretch the movie's budget as far as possible. Lavish sets akin to Blade Runner were built on location, but with serious difficulty. Argentina's film industry struggled to cope with the movie's requirements, causing considerable delays on equipment, props, supplies, and crew. More and more American British crew members were flown over as production scaled up, and the locals struggled to cope. Not ideal timing, as tensions from the Falklands War meant relations between Argentines and Brits weren't exactly at their peak. An even bigger problem, though, was the country's economy, which completely collapsed as filming commenced in March 1990. Hyperinflation drastically increased the price of, well, everything, and Argentina's rapidly fluctuating currency caused untold issues. With political and economic chaos unfolding in the outside world, the drinking culture on set kicked up to a whole new level. causing hangovers, delays, and increased injuries and issues during filming. I mean, who doesn't love a liquid lunch, right? But maybe after the movie is completed? And it wasn't like they needed more help with self-inflicted injuries. Lambert refused the use of fake swords and ended up having part of his finger chopped off during a fight scene. Speaking of Lambert, he led the disdain from the cast for the script, openly mocking the Zeist concept and attempting unsuccessfully to get things changed. As fellow producer Davis put it, every morning I woke up and realised that the best part of the day was behind me. Somewhat unbelievably, things were about to get even worse. With costs spiralling, a completion bond company, who had been installed as an insurance policy for the film's financial backers, stepped in and took control of production, forcing script rewrites, pushing the film to get made faster, ramping up the Planet Zeist elements to 11, and even taking over the final edit and locking Mulcahy out of his own film. In the director's words, the Bond company butchered the movie. Now, Highlander II didn't need to make sense or be good. With the Bond company in charge, it just needed to get made. This turned a film that didn't seem like it would be a masterpiece in the first place into a complete fiasco. The finished movie took us to the dark dystopian year of 2024, where the aging and no longer immortal Connor MacLeod must regain his immortality to take on Ironside's character General Katana, his arch-nemesis from a distant past on their home planet, as the film explains that immortals are actually aliens from Zeist who have travelled across space and time. Oh, and Connor helped to build a shield to save the planet, Earth that is, from radiation decades ago. But that shield is now controlled by an evil corporation and is slowly destroying all life. Oh yeah, and Connery's Ramirez is back to help him, along with environmental activist Madsen, who believes that the ozone layer has repaired itself, or something. In yet another blow, with negative stories swirling around the project, Fox turned down the opportunity to release Highlander II, and no other studios wanted to know. It would end up being picked up by Interstar Releasing, who, weren't exactly in the same league. After all the production problems, bad decisions, and the insurance company taking over the film, they were left with a movie that essentially nobody was happy with. Everyone knew Highlander II was DOA. Mulcahy disowned the film, fought unsuccessfully to have the director's name changed to Alan Smithy, and walked out of the premiere in disgust. And then, Highlander II opened in cinemas. Going back and looking at the reviews from the time, they weren't quite as brutal as I might have thought. They were terrible, of course, but the Quickening seemed to be met with bemusement as much as anything. What on earth was going on was the general consensus. Roger Ebert called it the most hilariously incomprehensible movie I've seen in many a long day, a movie almost awesome in its badness, while the Miami Herald's review noted that the plot gimmick not only makes the sequel unworthy of Highlander, it nearly destroys the charm of the original. As the Toronto Globe and Mail put it, the profoundly silly plot sinks this film beyond redemption. The movie opened across Europe throughout 1991 with a 100-minute runtime and a bizarre stars floating into space ending, before the Bond company made even more hacks and dropped the truly heinous, even more incoherent 91-minute version in November that became notorious for all the wrong reasons. In North America, it managed to make just over $15 million, which paled in comparison to the reported $30 million plus budget alone. Highlander II's reputation would only grow over time, and its place on the Mount Rushmore of bad sequels would be secured. In the preceding years, Mulcahy got a chance to revisit his most notorious disaster. Seeing the light of day in 1995 on video was his Renegade cut, which removed mentions of the planet Zeist, added scenes which had been hacked off in the cinematic releases edit, and attempted, perhaps in vain, to pull something out of the furnace. Either way, Highlander II: The Quickening is likely to always remain a truly tragic example of how not to get a successful movie made. But the thing is, even if the Highlander sequel proved an unmitigated failure, renewed interest had been sparked in the original film on the small screen. And though the Quickening was bashed from all sides, the franchise's lore began to grow regardless, and it largely had television to thank for saving its name from the abyss. In 1991, Davis Panzer Productions started developing a series based on the Highlander concept, which completely ignored the second movie, a move that seemed sensible overall. Arriving on TV in 1992, Highlander the series starred Adrian Paul as Duncan MacLeod, a new, younger immortal from the same clan, with Lambert making an appearance in the pilot for continuity purposes, and there wasn't a planet Zeist in sight. It became a syndicated hit for the producers, running for 6 seasons and cleansing Highlander's image more generally. But the producers wanted a full reset, and by 1994, the series had done such a good job of reinvigorating the brand that 2 more entries in the Highlander canon arrived on the scene. They weren't exactly successful, but they were undoubtedly there, and somehow they were in the process of creating a franchise. In a move that seemed unlikely, when the ultra-violent original arrived, Highlander the animated series would turn up on screens for younger audiences in the autumn of 1994. Riding the wave of the TV show's popularity, this French-Canadian co-production told the story of Quentin MacLeod, a descendant of the clan who battles evil immortal Cortan in the 27th century. Attempting to diversify Highlander to make it kid-friendly, this only saw moderate success across 2 syndicated seasons and remains a slightly odd footnote in the story. It did inspire its own video game though, the last of the MacLeods for the Atari Jaguar, which I'm reliably informed was terrible. Sadly, I'll never get the chance to play it. A third film, Highlander III: The Sorcerer, also conveniently sidestepped the sequel's storyline in the mid-90s, going into production with Mulcahy returning for a spot of redemption until a dispute around his salary saw him drop out, to be replaced by fellow music video director Andy Morahan. I guess they thought that lightning might strike twice with getting another video director on board for their debut feature. And they still had Lambert, plus a crazed performance from Mario Van Peebles as his new nemesis. Completely ignoring the second movie was a good move, but at this stage maybe rolling out a film starring Paul's Duncan MacLeod would have made more sense. With a $34 million budget behind it, The Sorcerer arrived in various international territories in late '94, before being rolled out in North American cinemas in January of '95, where it went even further by dropping the "free" from the title and calling itself Highlander: The Final Dimension in a last-ditch attempt to distance itself from the Quickening. Clearly though, on the big screen at least, Highlander's moment had passed. The movie scraped past its budget in cinemas, securing $36.7 million thanks largely to the non-American markets, and sank without much of a trace. Critics labelled it an incoherent mess, no more compelling than the average pile of bricks, and an unbelievably trashy meltdown of the Tartan Warrior franchise. Morahan followed the blueprint with fast cuts, plenty of special effects, and loud music, but without any soul, or bothering to actually make a good movie around it all. It might not be as bad as Part 2, but it's a bland, forgettable retread that has very little of interest to add. Back on TV, the Highlander series was building momentum. Genuinely a decent watch, with Paul an engaging lead. It was such a syndicated hit that when it wrapped up in 1998, it very quickly spawned a spin-off in the form of The Raven, which followed another immortal in Elizabeth Grayson's Amanda, and ran for 1 season. To reinvigorate the cinematic element of this rapidly growing franchise, I never quite understood why they didn't just attempt to transfer a beefed up version of their hit show to the big screen, and in the end, they kind of did that, just a few years too late. With Highlander the series coming to an end, a 4th film went into production in the summer of 1999, and this would be the film to finally bridge the Highlander worlds. Apart from the second film's world, nobody wanted to bridge that, although it did inherit a couple of things from the Quickening, a painful journey to release and some truly heinous reviews. Directed by yet another debutant in Doug Arniakowski, who amazingly enough was not graduating from music videos, Endgame unites Connor and Duncan MacLeod as the two faces of the franchise must unite to fend off Bruce Payne's character Jacob Kell, who has become too mighty for any one immortal to face alone. The problems for this one started, you guessed it, right from the start. Director Arniakowski got half the time he needed for pre-production. Studio backer Miramax, who had picked it up through their Dimension brand with the hopes of reheating a once successful film series, forced the producers, against their will, to make the movie in Romania, as it was cheap. Head baddie Payne got bronchitis, pushing the shoot months behind schedule. Dimension, aka the Weinstein brothers, overrode the producers in the edit, rushing effects work and making numerous cuts to the film. This gave a movie that had a lot of explaining to do already even more of an uphill task. And to top it all off, it was not screened prior to release. Never a good sign. But you know what? This one actually wasn't that bad. The reviews are scathing, as had become a pattern with the series, but the finished film was certainly the best since part 1. It had a decent villain, great fight choreography, and a couple of legitimately impactful plot points. I might have actually gone insane after consuming so much Highlander in such a short space of time, and it's not some grand masterpiece, but despite all its flaws, as a supposed climax of the story, I think Endgame deserves more than its terrible Rotten Tomatoes score suggests. Not many agreed with me at the time though. LA Weekly called it deathly dull. The New York Post noted it was a shapeless, tedious, hopelessly bad sequel, and Entertainment Weekly simply stated philosophically the endless, numbing sameness of it all. Audiences didn't buy it much either, although Dimension scaling back its support didn't help. It ended up making just $15.8 million against its $25 million budget, and it finally seemed like the power of immortality was fading. In the following years, attempts were made to right some of the film series' wrongs. A producer's cut of Endgame appeared on DVD, adding more than 10 minutes of footage and making changes to the version forced on them by the Weinsteins. A special edition of Highlander II, which attempted to expand on Mulcahy's renegade version and make a more coherent film from the dumpster fire of Highlander II, also arrived in 2004. As for new content though, that appeared to be it. But like a resurrected Sean Connery going suit shopping and drinking whiskey, by 2007 the party wasn't quite over yet. It had just moved to the Sci-Fi Channel for the first of what would be a new cinematic dawn, although it was so bad and unsuccessful that there would finally only be one. From Lawnmower Man director Brett Leonard, producers Davis and Panzer envisioned this as the catalyst for a trilogy of new Highlander movies built around Paul's lead character, attempting to answer the franchise's key question: what was the source of immortality? Originally seen as an opportunity to get Highlander back in cinemas, that ship rapidly sailed when the early reactions to the finished movie, its wonky story and shoddy effects work, was so poor that it ended up being shipped off to Sci-Fi to be the start of a new TV movie trilogy. But once they'd hacked off 10 minutes or so to fit the broadcast window, the source managed to be even worse. When it debuted on Sci-Fi in September 2007, reaction was overwhelmingly negative for a film which encapsulated the sad decline in quality of a concept which once felt genuinely fresh and exciting. It would later arrive on DVD, where reviews range from very bad to even worse. I'm not going to attempt to defend this one. The source is absolutely diabolical and dull as dishwater, even for what would eventually be a TV movie. It's like someone has created a parody of a bad Highlander sequel with no obvious redeeming features that really nobody needed. If The Source had been released as the first sequel in 1991, maybe people would herald this as one of the worst ever. But as it is, so few actually ended up seeing it that it instead drifted away to obscurity. As Paul would later reflect, I don't think it was a Highlander movie. It was a film that happened to have Duncan MacLeod in it. We lost what made Highlander special. If we're honest, what made Highlander special had been lost a long time ago. This was a series which traded in quality for output not long after Part 1, a series that managed to spawn not just one of the most high-profile one-star efforts in cinema history, but a litany of lower-profile fright fests as well. But honestly, as much as a lot of the quality of the Highlander entries was very questionable, you really do have to respect the hustle to just keep going after the horrendous experience of that second film. Making it, watching it, reviewing it, it was all awful all the time. Davis Panzer Productions managed to somehow continue this cash cow with numerous films, television series, comics, video games, and bundles of merchandise. Not all good, of course, in fact mostly far from it, but they never stopped believing, despite a huge amount of evidence to the contrary, decades worth of evidence. They probably made an absolute boatload of cash from VHS and DVD sales, and in many ways their commitment is admirable. But from a purely selfish perspective, after researching this video, I am personally glad they didn't make any more. Revisiting the Highlander story in Hollywood definitely brought me down a bit, and not because I had to watch some really terrible movies. Well, not just because of that anyway. It reminded me that Highlander's initial 80s success represents an era that has been lost, in all likelihood forever. An era where a movie could be a box office bomb in cinemas, but with its second life in home video could still spark an entire franchise. A time when movies were starting to be made for the video market, and when films could build a legacy through TV viewing. A time when physical media could allow big screen failures to truly become immortal. The dissolution of the video and later DVD market has robbed us of so many potentially classic, low and mid-budget movies. To take the words of Matt Damon to succinctly surmise the issue, it was a big part of our business, our revenue stream, and technology has just made that obsolete. You could afford to not make all your money when a film played in the theatre because you knew you had the DVD coming behind the release. 6 months later, you'd get a whole other chunk. It would be like reopening the movie almost. This was as true for Rounders as it was for Highlander, and that revenue stream evaporating means we get fewer movies like them these days, which isn't great, even if you take into account how woeful some of those Highlander sequels became. Modern Hollywood doesn't seem to have been deterred though. A brand new Highlander remake is set to begin filming soon, with Henry Cavill in the lead, Russell Crowe as Ramirez, and a cast which reportedly also includes Karen Gillan and Dave Bautista. Though I'd personally like to see Hollywood give the opportunity for new concepts rather than raiding yet more 80s IP, the fact that the $100 million project comes from John Wick director Chad Stahelski is hopefully an encouraging sign. Neither William Panzer or Peter Davis, the production duo that pushed Highlander to carry on when all hope seemed lost, has sadly lived to see the sick film make it in front of the cameras. But in a nice sense of continuity, Davis's son Joshua is amongst the producers, as he remembers when he asked his father in one of their final conversations if he would retire after the new Highlander made it to screens. The reply was simply, "Josh, after we make this movie, we're going to make 5 more. We'll have to wait to see whether they should have let sleeping immortals lie, I guess." What is the worst sequel of all time? Maybe one day in this long Sequelpalooza journey across time and space, I'll come to a conclusion on that. But Highlander II has to be a contender. Where it went wrong is pretty clear. Shooting in Argentina at a time of economic chaos in the first place, creditors taking over creative decisions, a lack of cohesive strategic vision, a story which couldn't really hold a candle to Part 1 to start with. The Bond company stepping in to turn the crazy and nonsensical up to the max made the film worse, but everything I have seen, read and heard in making this video gave me the impression that Highlander 2 was still going to be a bit of a clanger before they intervened. Either way, it ended up being a truly bewildering, jumbled mess, succeeding in scorching almost all of the goodwill and logic established by the first movie. The Quickening has become a punchline for bad sequels for good reason. The first film had never been intended to launch a franchise, and without that forward planning, they were always starting 2 steps behind. But to end up with something this diabolical does take a special set of circumstances. Unless it had a really clever spin on the story, Highlander II objectively had no creative reason to exist, and revealing that immortals are actually from another planet just was not going to cut it. With all that said, there is a strange sense of enjoyment to be found in the total ridiculousness of it all, and although Highlander II is obviously not the movie Mulcahy envisioned, you can see very occasional small nuggets of a film he might have made under different circumstances. Kind of. Mulcahy's recut Renegade version attempted to improve things as best it could in a very DIY way, but maybe it's sometimes best to let sleeping aliens from the planet Zeist lie. You might be able to make an argument that some of the later Highlander sequels from the MacLeod-verse are actually worse, if you were so inclined and your non-immortal life depended on it. They are certainly more boring than the Quickening, which maybe is the biggest sin of all. The first Highlander had such a neat and concise narrative, with a satisfying conclusion. From the talent to the music to the timing of the film arriving on VHS, it was lightning in a bottle, a moment that could never be repeated. There should have, you guessed it, been only one. Sorry, I swear that's the last time I'll say that. The first Highlander film stands up well to viewing these days. It's ridiculous and over the top but charming too, and remains the closest Russell Mulcahy got to transferring the essence of what made his music videos so memorable to the big screen. Its sustained relevance demonstrates the level of connection people felt to that original film. Despite what this guy thought, as with other music video director pioneers of the 1980s, Mulcahy's Hollywood career wouldn't ever really flourish completely in the post-Highlander years. In the 90s he made Blue Ice with Michael Caine, The Real McCoy with Kim Basinger, and The Shadow in 1994, but nothing quite clicked or made any money. The Shadow especially was a high-profile flop, even if Young Culture Slice remembers thinking it was pretty cool at the time. By the end of the 90s, he was reuniting with Christopher Lambert to make serial killer thriller Resurrection, but it didn't even make it to cinemas in the US. Though he later made an entry in the hugely profitable Resident Evil film series, his unique style never quite transferred as successfully as this guy and others were convinced it would. The fact that Highlander II and its unbelievably messy journey to the screen exists makes for a pretty fascinating story all these years later, even if most of those who actually lived through its making would be unlikely to agree, with Mulcahy himself taking a reflective stance on the lowest point of his career CV. It was and strange and ridiculous. What a disaster. It's weird how they built a huge franchise off the first film. Once you break your own rules, the audience feels betrayed, which is what happened with Highlander 2. If a franchise can survive Highlander 2 and go on for decades, then we can be confident that a franchise can survive essentially anything. And given its ability to regenerate despite seemingly insurmountably bad entries into the series, with a blockbuster rebirth on the horizon, this is a franchise that might actually prove to be immortal. But who wants to live forever anyway?